I do think that the right needs to sometimes be prepared to actually push back and reform Labor policies, not just kind of bed them in the way John Key bedded in Helen Clark's legacy. We can't afford to do that with the Ardern Hipkins legacy. But make no mistake, ACT exists with a different mission and a different purpose. We're not here to fight Labor and then babysit their policies. We are here to restore the values of personal freedom, personal responsibility, and private enterprise over state control that are the key to New Zealand's long-term prosperity. The one thing ACT's very clear on is that we won't go for the baubles. Other people have done that and it's got them nowhere, and especially hasn't got New Zealand anywhere either. I don't think being a minister in the New Zealand government is a particularly laudable achievement. It's an opportunity to do good. And if we don't have a coalition agreement where the government is prepared to do worthwhile policy reform, then we certainly don't want ACT ministers there apologising for bad National Party policies. If they're not prepared to make that agreement, we will make them government, but we'll also sit on the crossbenches and negotiate everything vote by vote. That would be a painful situation for both parties, but we're prepared to do it as a backstop to these guys thinking they can ignore us. This time will be different on current polling. They're going to have to share power and be prepared to reverse Labor policies, two things they've never done before, but are essential for the long-term prosperity of New Zealand. New Zealand has to sort the meaning of the treaty within a liberal democratic society, and that means the next parliament is going to have to stop leaving it to the courts and the tribunal and the public sector who've run amok, and actually define the so-called principles of the treaty that are now interspersed through just about every piece of legislation and public administration. And that means taking the treaty back to what it actually says. The government has the right to govern. People have the right to tiratanga or self-determination over their taonga or their property rights. And people have ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, the same rights and duties. That has to be resolved, because we can't make progress in any other area when we're constantly arguing that there's two versions of humanity on these islands. It's just not true, it's not plausible, and it's never worked anywhere in the world. People are seeing whether or not you get into med school, whether or not you get put up the waiting list, whether or not you get certain pharmaceuticals, how your school is run, who you have to consult on resource management, who gets seats at the table governing Three Waters, who gets to be on the plant variety committee that registers IP for new plants. I mean, you name it, through every element of New Zealand society, this government is making your identity more important than your humanity. It is absolutely disastrous. That universal human rights, liberal democratic ideals, one person, one vote, and we are all special because we're all human. And that comes before what used to be called bigotry and prejudice, judging people by their superficial characteristics. That's what we've said consistently. And we believe that to say anything else actually is racist.
What about a capital gains tax? What's your stance on that?
Totally wrong. You pay tax on the income you get from a capital asset. That means the value of any capital asset is the net present value of its after-tax income. The idea that you should have your asset devalued by the tax liability whoever buys it will face on the income from that asset, and then also pay a tax on the asset itself, in our view, is a form of double taxation. And New Zealand doesn't need more taxation. If you could tax your way to prosperity, then, Chairman Mao would have been a major success story, but he wasn't. In fact, no country has ever managed to tax its way to prosperity.
Labour's own conference the other week raised the prospect of superannuation and the fact that that could spark a bit of a debate this election. Where does ACT stand on that?
Look, the age has to rise, and it should start rising immediately at a very slow rate. It should go up by 2 months per year over 12 years. That would save around $16 billion in the 12-year adjustment period. It means that somebody who is 60 currently intending to receive superannuation in 5 years' time, when they're 65, would receive it in 5 years' time and 10 months when they're 65 and 10 months. In other words, they would receive it not in June 2028, but I guess in about April 2029. That's what the adjustment actually looks like for someone who's, say, 60, and you can do those numbers for people of any age if you like. I think it's absolutely critical that if Australia, America, Britain, Israel, Ireland, Spain, Italy, did I mention? Taiwan. I mean, basically the whole world is recognizing that people are living longer, they're having fewer kids, meaning there's less people in the workforce to pay tax, to pay for pensions. And adjusting the age of superannuation is a fair and reasonable way to respond to that. However, the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be. ACT's the only party saying it should adjust now. The Nats say they'll adjust it, but they want to start adjusting it in 2044. We think that's a little weak. And then there is the Labour Party, who are just totally irresponsible. In order to get one more term in power, they will kick the can down the road on a long-term problem for New Zealand. And that's why I say ACT's the only party that is prepared to say things that are unpopular at times, but absolutely necessary.